Hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey Lemon, Senior Technical Marketing Manager for the VCF division here at Broadcom, and I want to welcome you to this video series for the Management Pack Builder and VMware Cloud Foundation. And so, just right out of the gate, right, this series is really intended to equip you with both the conceptual knowledge and even the practical skills to start building your own management packs. And so at the end of this series, you're going to be able to do a couple things. Obviously, you're going to be able to understand the intent behind the tool, which is what we covered in the first video, as well as describe, how it works, complete with the insight into the architecture and all that kind of good stuff. And again, all that was covered in the first video. Then we're going to in this series, we're going to build a simple management pack directly within VCF Operations so that you can all follow along with me and even get some hands-on experience in your own environments, which is indeed the focus of this video right here. And then finally, we're going to apply all the key learnings in this series to show you how you can build your own third-party management packs, which is, again, we're going to be doing that in the last video in this series. And so with that, let's just go ahead and get right to it, right? And so, odds are if you're watching this video, you already have VCF Operations 9 installed. And so in this session, we're going to show you how you can use a management pack builder to extract various properties and metrics from the collectors that are in your VCF environment. And you may be asking yourself, well, why create a management pack for VCF properties and metrics instead of, creating a management pack that leverages, a third-party integration within VCF, right? And that's a very good question. And to answer that, we're going to be looking at the full potential of the management pack builder in the next video, like I said, but I intentionally chose to build our first management pack within VCF because it's a great way for you to follow along with me step by step in your own VCF 9 environment. And so with that said, we're going to be doing a couple things that's going to help you build that muscle memory, as you take this information to start building your own proprietary management packs that you can leverage to extract and again report third-party integration metrics directly within VCF. And again, that's going to be the next video that is available in this series. And so in this particular video, we're going to be doing a couple things here, right? We're going to access VCS public API. There's a little addendum that you can apply to the end of your VCF. That environment is that FQDN, right? That will show you everything that VCS API exposes for you to manipulate. And then we're going to connect to a data source to extract relevant information for our management pack. And then we're going to explore, session authentication syntax needed to request an API token so that you can get and release these sessions. And then once all that is working, we're going to look at creating an API request that will allow us to pull supported VCF version information as well as properties for the various collectors in our environment. And then we're going to build on that API request by using the chaining feature within the management pack builder so that we can extract even more information, whether it's the name, the type, the state of that collector, last heartbeat, all that kind of good stuff. It's all going to be available here. And then finally, we're going to take this information and we're going to basically just add additional properties to our collector object just for reporting purposes. And so I got to tell you, obviously it sounds like a lot, but I'm going to try to make this easy to follow. And so if you're following along, go ahead and open up your VCF 9 environment. And so, as I mentioned previously, right, VCF's management pack builder doesn't require any coding. And the biggest reason for that is its implementation of Swagger, now officially known as Open API Specification. And basically, it's a suite of open source tools used to design, build, document, and even consume, RESTful web services. And so within the VCF ecosystem, Swagger is primarily delivered as an interactive, it's a web-based interface that allows whether you're an admin or the developer to interact directly with APIs, again, without writing a single line of code. And so as we walk through this, you're going to see that, instead of making you rely solely on static documentation, VCF through Swagger, provides a live sort of like a plug and play environment that's got a couple things. It's got endpoint visualization where it displays every available API endpoint, whether it's for managing hosts, clusters, or even licenses. And it's presented in a very clean and categorized list. And then there's even a try it out button. And I got to tell you, this is a pretty popular feature because it allows you to input parameters, you can authenticate and actually execute API calls directly from the browser to see real-time responses. And so let's just go ahead and begin creating our new management pack that will capture the properties of the various collectors that are associated with this VCF environment. And so with that said, we're just going to go ahead and simply give our management pack a name, and we're going to provide a description. And then once that is done, we can go ahead and add a source. And so as we're filling out this, just a couple things, so for the host name, we're going to specify a VCF reference environment that serves the VCF API that we discussed in the previous step. And, to save us some time, right, in the request section, we can also specify a base API path, which will be prepended with every API request that we do moving forward. And one of the things that I want to point out here is that you can also configure the default port as well as define TLS behavior. And so in this particular case, we're going to keep the defaults. And for authentication type, we're going to have a custom one here where we can specify labels for this environment's username as well as the password. And one of the things that I should point out is that the management pack builder also supports, most session-based authentication, as well as other API, auth configurations, which is what I'm leveraging here. I just need to make a slight modification to the authentication details since I'm using a custom one where I'm saying that the username and password should be using the following syntax here. Now, before you ding me and say, hey, Kels, I thought you said the management pack builder is no code. I just want to say that this right here is the extent of coding that you'll most likely do. And again, it's for a very specific use case, namely that custom authentication piece. And so with that, let's just go ahead and move on. And so now that the session has been, successfully made, I can actually, see the test response that has provided us an API token, right? And I'm going to basically leverage this token ID to assign its value to my global, to my authorization headers, right? And so with that being said, we can follow a very similar workflow to release a session as well, simply by putting in the appropriate API path and then hitting that release button. And so real quick, right, just to sort of summarize the steps that we've taken up to this point, we've named and described our management pack, we've defined a data source, and we've defined the parameters to get and release an API session. And so with that being said, now let's test the connection by using another API call from Swagger. And so in this case, we're going to leverage the API call that shows us the supported versions of VCF. And if we're successful, which seems to be the case by this test response, we can go ahead and save the source. And with that, now let's build our first API request for our collector. Again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to refer to my list of API calls in Swagger to get the API path so that the management pack builder knows what parameters I needed to pull. I'm also going to give this request a very user-friendly name. And with that, now I'm going to make the request to see if I'm getting the results that I'm expecting. And it turns out that I am, which is a very, very good thing. And with that, we can go ahead and go to the next step, which is pagination. Now, one of the things I want to point out about pagination is that it's good for requests that deal with large data sets, right? Where you need to divide it into smaller chunks to get more efficient retrieval of the data. But since this is a fairly small data set for this very, very simple demo that we're building within VCF, I'm going to go ahead and disable it. Okay, and so now that I've built my first API request that retrieves, various things from the collector. Like I said, the name, the type, and state, and even other parameters. I'm going to double down and I'm going to get some additional collector parameters by using the chaining feature. And a key advantage to chaining is the fact that it allows me to take the output of one request and make it the input for the next request. And so let's just go ahead and add some chaining here. And one of the things that I want you to notice is that my first API request is listed as the parent one. And then I'm going to use a wildcard to expose all the properties for the collectors in my initial API response. And then I'm going to use that output to get more detailed ID information on the adapter instance for each collector. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go back to Swagger to get that API path so that I can enter it. Now, one of the things I want you to notice here is the brackets around the word ID. So this is indeed a variable that I need to use to specify my request parameters. And so luckily for me, VCF has already pulled it. So I'm going to basically just highlight the word ID, and then I'm going to go to the drop down and I'm going to select ID request parameter. And when I do that, that's going to overwrite the ID request parameter placeholder with the exact value that VCF needs to finalize my request. So again, going back to that whole notion of no coding there. And then once complete, right, I can just finalize a request. And if all goes well, which again seems to be the case here, I can go ahead and test my response. And again, as I proceed to the pagination page, I'm just going to go ahead and disable it because it's not needed. All right, so now with that, we've got our API request working for our collector. So let's just go ahead and define the object. So I'm going to go ahead and give the object a name and a description. And then I'm going to, select an icon if available. And then I'm going to, select the attributes for my API call that I like to include, namely the collector name, the type, the various states that it may have, as well as the ID. But as you can see here, I've got a lot of options, including the time of last heartbeat and even Boolean attributes such as data persistence being enabled or not. And for each selected attribute, we can update it with a human-friendly label and specify whether that attribute is a key performance indicator, right? And so, for numeric attributes, we can also specify a unit and also specify whether that attribute is a property or a metric. And so for all of this right here, I'm just going to go ahead and keep the defaults. And next, for object identifiers, we need to select one or more attributes that can be combined to uniquely identify, this collector object within VCF operations. And so in this case, we're going to associate the collector name with its universally unique identifier, that UUID. And with that, right, so now we're at a point where it's actually time to test and build our management pack by performing a collection of data that we've defined in our API request. And so here, we can see the identifiers, the properties, and the relationships that we defined in the previous sections. And it looks good. Everything is working as expected. And so since everything is looking good, right, let's just go ahead and review our configurations and just really ensure that everything is captured properly before proceeding to build our management pack for actual deployment in our repository. And with that, this concludes the overall demo. And if you followed along in your environment, I hope you found this useful. And like I said, in our next video, we're going to take it to the next level by actually showing you how you can build your own management pack that leverages a third-party solution, including its own API calls. Thank you.